Russian fighter jet just challenged an American jet. The most dangerous confrontation since the fall of the Soviet Union. The pilots could literally see the whites of each other's eyes. This isn't a Top Gun scene. It's not a video game simulation. This actually happened. Cameras caught everything, and the footage will leave you speechless. But hold on, because what I'm about to show you is even more shocking. This kind of incident is happening more and more often, and you need to know what's really going on in the freezing skies near American territory. Is Russia testing the limits? Will the United States strike back? Stay with me till the end. This story is much deeper and more dangerous than it looks. Let's get straight to the point. The footage you're about to see was released by NORAD, the North American Aerospace Defense Command, the agency responsible for monitoring U.S. and Canadian airspace. In the video, you can clearly see a Russian Su-35 fighter making an extremely aggressive maneuver right in front of an American F-16. The Russian jet cuts across the front of a U.S. fighter at an absurdly close distance. We're talking just a few meters apart. To give you a sense of how dangerous, that is, at that altitude and speed, any turbulence, any sudden movement, any minor miscalculation could result in a catastrophic collision. The American pilot even tries to break away to the side, but watching the footage, it's obvious he had almost no time to react. If the worst had happened, there was practically nothing anyone could have done to prevent disaster. And where did this happen? In a stretch of international airspace near Alaska, the northernmost U.S. state, right on the border with Russian territory. But hold on, because the story gets a lot more complex once you understand the full context. According to official information released by NORAD on September 23, 2024, the command detected and tracked 4 Russian military aircraft operating inside the Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone. This zone, known by the acronym ADIZ, is an area of international airspace where the United States and Canada monitor all aircraft approaching North American territory. The U.S. team was conducting routine monitoring, tracking 2 Russian Tu-95 strategic bombers, those massive 4-engine planes developed back in the Soviet era, along with 2 Sukhoi Su-35 air defense fighters, modern and extremely agile aircraft from the Russian Air Force. Intercept and escort missions like this happen regularly. Russian military aircraft often test American defenses by flying close to the exclusion zone, and the U.S. always scrambles fighters to shadow them and make sure they don't cross into sovereign American airspace. Up to this point, nothing unusual. But during this particular interception, one of the Russian Su-35 pilots decided to do something completely outside standard protocol. He pulled a maneuver that left military experts everywhere stunned. The Russian fighter flew directly toward the American F-16, passing at a dangerously close distance, a clear show of aggression and disregard for basic aerial safety rules. The U.S. response came quickly. General Gregory Guillot, commander of NORAD and U.S. Northern Command, was blunt in his public statement. He said outright that the Russian pilot's conduct was unsafe, unprofessional, and endangered every aircraft involved in the operation. But the strongest part of General Guillot's statement was when he said that this kind of behavior is not what's expected from a professional air force. That's a heavy accusation coming from such a high-ranking officer, basically saying the Russians acted irresponsibly and dangerously, breaking all the international safety protocols designed specifically to prevent accidents between military forces from different nations. NORAD even decided to make the video public, something that's not typical in these cases. Normally, aircraft interceptions are treated as routine operations and don't receive much publicity. The fact that they released the footage shows just how serious the incident was and how important it was to send a clear message to the international community that such behavior can't be tolerated. Military aviation experts explain that there are well-established protocols for interceptions. When a country detects foreign military aircraft approaching its airspace, the intercepting fighters must maintain a safe distance, usually several hundred meters, and use visual and radio signals to communicate. What the Russian pilot did was exactly the opposite. Now comes the part that makes this situation even more concerning. That September 2024 incident wasn't a one-off event. In fact, we're seeing an increasingly aggressive pattern of behavior from Russian forces near U.S. territory. Let's look at the numbers that reveal a troubling trend. According to official NORAD data, there were at least 9 interceptions of Russian military aircraft near Alaska in 2024, 9 times in a single year that the U.S. had to scramble fighters to monitor Russian planes in the region. And when we look at 2025, things only intensified. In August 2025, something absolutely unprecedented happened. In a single week, Russian reconnaissance planes were intercepted 4 times near Alaska for interceptions in just 7 days. That's a dramatic increase in the frequency of these operations. Defense experts say that level of activity is extremely unusual and reflects a significant shift in Russia's military posture in the area. And it doesn't stop there. In July 2024, something happened that had never been seen before. NORAD detected and intercepted a joint formation of Russian and Chinese bombers operating together near Alaska. Two Russian Tu-95 strategic bombers flying in formation with two Chinese H-6 bombers. It was the first time in history that Russian and Chinese forces had been intercepted conducting joint operations so close to U.S. territory. That event marked a new chapter in international military relations. It showed that Russia and China are coordinating their military operations in a way they never have before, sending a clear message that they're willing to jointly challenge the American military presence in the North Pacific. You might be asking yourself, why Alaska? Why are the Russians so interested in this specific region? The answer lies in the area's strategic geography. Alaska is the northernmost U.S. state, separated from Russia only by the Bering Strait, a narrow body of water about 85 kilometers wide at its narrowest point. That means that in some places the distance between American and Russian territory is shorter than the distance between many cities within the same country. During the Soviet era, this region was considered the front line of tension between the two superpowers. Soviet military aircraft regularly tested American defenses, and the United States maintained a massive military presence in Alaska precisely to guard against a potential invasion from the north. After the fall of the Soviet Union, and the apparent thaw in relations between the two countries during the 1990s and early 2000s, those operations decreased significantly. But in recent years, especially after the start of the war in Ukraine in 2022, we've seen a resurgence of that aggressive Russian posture in the region. Alaska also holds enormous strategic importance because of its location in the Arctic. With climate change, melting polar ice, new maritime routes are opening up, and there are massive reserves of oil and natural gas beneath the Arctic Ocean. Several countries, including Russia, the United States, Canada, Norway, and Denmark, are competing for influence and access to those resources. Russia has heavily invested in its Arctic military presence in recent years. They've reopened abandoned Soviet-era bases, built new facilities, and greatly increased the number of military exercises in the region. Flights near Alaska are part of this broader strategy to demonstrate power and presence in the Arctic. To respond to this growing threat, the United States maintains a strong military presence in Alaska. Eielson Air Force Base and Joint Base Elmendorf-Richardson are the main installations in the region, housing F-16 and F-35 fighters, as well as early warning and refueling aircraft. The F-16s that intercept Russian aircraft are multi-role fighters that have been in service for decades but remain extremely capable. They can fly at speeds more than twice the speed of sound and are equipped with advanced radar and weapon systems. When NORAD detects Russian planes approaching Alaska's air defense identification zone, American fighters scramble within minutes. The process is highly coordinated, involving ground and airborne-based radar, surveillance satellites, and constant communication between multiple U.S. and Canadian defense agencies. The American pilots who carry out these interception missions undergo intensive training. They have to be prepared to handle tense situations, stay calm under pressure, and strictly follow engagement protocols, even when faced with aggressive or provocative behavior from opposing pilots. To fully understand what's happening in the skies over Alaska, we need to look at the wider geopolitical picture of U.S.-Russia relations. And that picture couldn't be more complex or more tense. Since the start of the war in Ukraine in February 2022, relations between Moscow and Washington have hit their lowest point since the end of the Soviet Union. The United States has led massive economic sanctions against Russia and provided billions of dollars in military aid to Ukraine. From the Russian perspective, this represents a direct interference in its sphere of influence. But the tensions go far beyond Ukraine. According to a report from the Center for Strategic and International Studies published in March 2025, Russia has been conducting an expanding campaign of sabotage and subversion against European and American targets across Europe. The report notes that the number of Russian attacks nearly tripled between 2023 and 2024. That's an extremely troubling revelation. We're talking about what's called a shadow operation, where Russian military intelligence agents carry out acts of sabotage, espionage, and influence operations against Western nations. This is no longer just a standoff between armed forces. It's a multidimensional tension that involves spying, cyber attacks, disinformation, and direct military provocations. On top of that, Russia has made increasingly threatening statements about its advanced weapons arsenal. In August 2025, the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs accused Washington of escalating tensions by testing and deploying defense systems in several regions around the world, including Denmark and the Philippines. Moscow claimed that these moves violate the spirit of previous arms control agreements. A question many people ask is, if these Russian aircraft are flying in international airspace, don't they have the right to be there? Technically, yes, but the situation is more complicated than it looks. International airspace begins 12 nautical miles beyond a country's coastline. Any aircraft, military or civilian, has the right to fly there as long as it follows international aviation rules and doesn't pose a threat. The Alaska Air Defense Identification Zone extends well beyond American sovereign airspace, reaching into international territory. So yes, Russian aircraft have the legal right to fly in those areas. The problem isn't where they are, it's how they behave when they're there. There are long-established international protocols dictating how military aircraft should act when encountering one another in international airspace. These protocols were developed over decades precisely to prevent accidents and misunderstandings that could escalate into conflict. When a Russian pilot performs an aggressive maneuver, flying just meters away from an American fighter, he's violating those safety protocols. It's not about legal rights. It's about responsible, professional behavior that avoids putting lives at risk. There's also an important psychological element to these operations. When Russia sends strategic bombers to fly close to U.S. territory, when they increase the frequency of those missions, when Russian pilots perform aggressive stunts, all of that sends a message. It's a show of strength, a way to test the adversary's defenses, and proof that they have both the capability and the will to operate near enemy territory. And it's not just near Alaska where this kind of situation is unfolding. Russia has been ramping up provocative military operations in several parts of the world. In Europe, there have been multiple incidents of Russian aircraft violating the airspace of NATO member states. In 2025, Norway reported that Russian military planes violated its airspace 3 times. Estonia invoked Article 4 of the NATO treaty, which allows for consultations when a member country feels its territorial integrity or security is threatened after Russian aircraft flew dangerously close to its borders. In the Baltic Sea and the Black Sea, Russian warships regularly conduct military exercises near the territorial waters of NATO countries. Russian submarines have been detected near underwater internet cables connecting Europe and North America, raising concerns about potential sabotage of communications infrastructure. Russia's strategy seems clear: to demonstrate that it can operate near Western territories whenever it wants, constantly testing response times and the defensive capabilities of its adversaries. This serves both to gather intelligence on how Western forces react and to send a political message that Russia remains a military power capable of projecting force beyond its borders. Faced with this increasingly challenging scenario, the United States and its NATO allies have been stepping up their own military operations and regional presence. In September 2025, the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford, the newest and largest American carrier, took part in one of NATO's largest operations in the North Atlantic. The presence of that colossal warship, with its fleet of F-35 and F-18 fighters, represented a clear show of American strength in the region. The United States has also been working to strengthen the defenses of its European allies. According to analyses from security-focused research centers, Washington continues to maintain a strong and sustainable military presence in Europe specifically to deter Russian aggression. That includes troop rotations, joint military exercises, and the sale of advanced defense systems to NATO's Eastern Front allies. This deterrence strategy works on multiple levels. First, there's the physical presence of American and allied forces ready to respond quickly to any threat. Second, there are regular military exercises that demonstrate capability and train forces to operate together in case of real conflict. Third, there are surveillance systems constantly monitoring Russian military movements. But this strategy comes with enormous costs. Keeping fighters on alert to launch within minutes, running radar systems 24 hours a day, training pilots for interception missions, all of it requires billions in investment. And with the growing frequency of Russian incursions, those costs are only expected to rise. Perhaps the most concerning aspect of all this is the risk of an accidental escalation. When military aircraft from rival powers operate so close to each other, amid high political tension, the potential for a catastrophic incident increases dramatically. Imagine if, On that September day in 2024, when the Russian Su-35 flew within meters of the American F-16, there had actually been a collision. Two military jets colliding midair, likely killing both pilots. How would the two nations have responded? Historically, there are troubling precedents. During the Soviet era, there were several incidents where Soviet and American military aircraft collided or engaged in encounters that nearly triggered dangerous escalations. In some cases, only the restraint of military commanders prevented tense situations from spiraling into larger conflicts. The problem is that in times of high tension, there's always the risk of misinterpretation. A movement one side sees as defensive might be perceived by the other as aggressive. An evasive maneuver might be interpreted as preparation for an attack. In a matter of seconds, decisions made by individual pilots can have enormous geopolitical consequences. That's why safety protocols are so crucial. That's why international organizations have spent decades working to establish clear rules for how military forces should behave when they encounter each other in international space. And that's why behavior like that shown by the Russian pilot is so harshly condemned by the international community. So what does that shocking video, the Russian fighter jet passing dangerously close to the American plane, really represent? More than just a tense moment between two pilots in Alaska's frozen skies, that footage is a symbol of a broader, more complex geopolitical reality. We live in a world where tensions between great powers are rising, where international cooperation is giving way to competition and confrontation, and where carefully built safety protocols are being ignored in favor of shows of force. And this doesn't just affect military officers or politicians, it affects all of us. International stability, respect for established rules, and the ability of rival nations to maintain civilized relations despite their differences. All of that is essential to a safer world. When we see behavior like that demonstrated by the Russian pilot, when we see the frequency of these incidents increasing, when we watch nuclear powers constantly testing each other's limits, there are legitimate reasons for concern. But there are also reasons for hope. Despite all the tension, all the incidents, and all the fiery rhetoric from both sides, there still hasn't been a direct conflict between these powers. The communication channels between Russia and the United States, though strained, still exist. The safety protocols, though sometimes violated, are still recognized as important by most military professionals. The future of this situation will largely depend on the political will of leaders in Moscow, Washington, and other key capitals to keep competition within safe limits. It will depend on the professionalism of military forces that must operate close to one another without allowing political tension to turn into avoidable tragedy. And it will also depend on all of us, as citizens, staying informed about these issues, understanding the complexities involved, and demanding that our leaders prioritize security and international stability over risky displays of strength. That moment in Alaska skies was a warning, a reminder that we live in dangerous times, but also that we share a collective responsibility to ensure those dangers are managed with wisdom, professionalism, and a commitment to peace.